Hi class, welcome to the Psychology of Learning. This presentation is designed for both teachers and learners who want to understand how learning actually works. Why do some lessons stick and others fade? Why do some students thrive while others shut down? The answers have been building for over a century. We are going to walk through the biggest ideas, the key researchers behind them, and why every single one still matters in your classroom and in your own learning journey today. Let's get started. Let's begin at the very beginning. Two philosophers set up a debate that still echoes in every classroom today. Plato, who lived from approximately 428 to 348 BC, believed learning was passive. He thought knowledge already exists inside us at birth, and we are simply remembering it. John Locke, who lived from 1632 to 1704, completely disagreed. In 1689, he argued we are born as a tabula rasa, meaning a blank slate. Everything we know comes from our environment. Knowledge is built, not uncovered. Is learning something we uncover or something we build? That question is still being answered today. Now we are moving into one of the most foundational theories in all of psychology, behaviorism. Developed by Pavlov, Watson, Skinner, and Thorndike from the late 1800s through the mid-1900s. Behaviorism emerged from a desire to make psychology a hard science. The core idea? If you cannot observe it and measure it, it does not count. Edward Thorndike was one of the earliest behaviorists. His law of effect stated that behaviors followed by satisfying outcomes are more likely to be repeated. This became the foundation for all reinforcement theory that followed. Ivan Pavlov rang a bell every time he fed dogs, until the dogs started salivating at just the bell. That is classical conditioning, learning through association. John B. Watson took Pavlov's ideas further and applied them to humans. He argued that all human behavior could be explained through conditioning, and that psychology should focus only on observable actions, not thoughts or feelings. B.F. Skinner extended the idea even further. Behavior is shaped by consequences. Reward a behavior and it increases. Punish it and it decreases. He called these positive and negative reinforcement. The classroom takeaway? Grades, praise, stickers, and detention are all behaviorism in action. The limitation? Behaviorism ignores what is happening inside the learner's mind entirely. It treats the learner as passive, and that is exactly what the next theory pushed back on. Now we move into cognitivism. Ebbinghaus, Piaget, and Bloom, the 1880s through the 1950s. Cognitivism pushed back on behaviorism by saying the internal mental processes, thinking, memory, and problem solving, are exactly where learning happens. The mind is not a black box, it matters deeply. Hermann Ebbinghaus was a 19th century German psychologist who gave us the forgetting curve. His research showed how rapidly we lose information over time without active effort to retain it. Spaced repetition and review cycles come directly from his work. Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist who lived from 1896 to 1980, gave us 4 stages of cognitive development. The sensory-motor stage, from birth to age 2, is when children learn through senses and physical action. The pre-operational stage, from ages 2 to 7, is when language emerges, but thinking is still egocentric and not yet logical. The concrete operational stage, from ages 7 to 11, is when logical thinking develops around real and tangible objects. And the formal operational stage, which begins at age 12 and continues through adulthood, is when abstract reasoning and hypothetical thinking fully emerge. Benjamin Bloom gave us Bloom's taxonomy in 1956, revised in 2001. It is a ladder of cognitive complexity using 6 action verbs: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Lower rungs are foundational. Upper rungs are higher-order thinking. It remains the most widely used framework for writing learning objectives today. Now we move into Constructivism. Vygotsky and Brunner, mid-1900s. Constructivism argues that learners do not passively receive knowledge. They actively construct it through experience. This is a big shift from both behaviorism and cognitivism. Lev Vygotsky was a Soviet psychologist who lived from 1896 to 1934. He gave us two enduring concepts that you will hear referenced constantly in education today. First, the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. This is the space between what a learner can do independently and what they can do with guidance. Too easy produces boredom. Too hard produces shutdown. Hit the ZPD and learning happens. Second, scaffolding. This is temporary, structured support that is gradually removed as the learner gains competence. Think of it like training wheels. You provide the support, and then you step back as the student grows. Jerome Bruner was an American psychologist who lived from 1915 to 2016. He proposed 3 modes of representation. The inactive mode, from birth to age 1, is knowledge stored through physical action and muscle memory. The iconic mode, from ages 1 to 6, is knowledge stored as mental images and visual representations. The symbolic mode, from age 7 onward, is knowledge stored through language, words, and abstract symbols. Importantly, adults use all 3 modes depending on the task. Bruner also gave us the spiral curriculum. Revisit core concepts repeatedly at increasing levels of complexity. Do not teach something once and move on. Layer it, build on it, come back to it. Ready to keep going? Let's shift our focus now to something a little different. Up until this point, every theory we have covered has focused on behavior or mental processes. Humanistic learning says we need to zoom out and look at the whole person. Maslow and Rogers, 1940s through the 1960s. Abraham Maslow gave us the hierarchy of needs in 1943. You have probably seen this pyramid before. The 5 levels are physiological needs, safety, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. The idea is simple but powerful. A student who is hungry, unsafe, or socially isolated cannot engage in higher-order thinking. Basic needs must be met before learning can occur. This gave us one of the most quoted phrases in all of education: Maslow before Bloom. Carl Rogers extended humanistic ideas into the classroom. He argued that the teacher's role is to facilitate, not direct. Learning happens best when there is trust, psychological safety, and genuine respect between teacher and student. Rogers believed that when learners feel safe enough to take risks, that is when real growth happens. The takeaway for teachers and learners alike: classroom culture is not separate from learning. It is learning. If students do not feel safe, seen, and valued, they cannot climb Bloom's ladder, no matter how well the lesson is designed. Here is something fascinating. What if we learn just by watching other people? That is exactly what Albert Bandura discovered. Bandura and Vygotsky, 1960s through the 1970s. Albert Bandura's social learning theory, published in 1977, argued that we learn by observing and modeling others, not just through direct reinforcement. You do not have to experience something yourself to learn from it. You just have to watch. His famous Bobo doll experiments demonstrated this powerfully. Children who watched an adult behave aggressively toward a doll later imitated that same aggressive behavior, even though no one told them to, and no one rewarded them for it. They simply watched and learned. Bandura also gave us the concept of self-efficacy. This is a person's belief in their own ability to succeed at a specific task. and it is one of the strongest predictors of academic performance ever identified. Students who believe they can learn do. Students with low self-efficacy disengage before they even try. As educators, this means the words we use with students matter enormously. Building belief builds performance. It is also worth noting that Vygotsky belongs here too. His zone of proximal development is fundamentally social. Learning does not happen in isolation. It happens in relationship, in conversation, and in community. Now we turn to one of the most thought-provoking theories in all of education. Have you ever had a student who struggled with reading, but could take apart an engine? Or a student who could not sit still, but could dance a routine perfectly after seeing it once? That is exactly what Howard Gardner was talking about. Howard Gardner, 1983. Gardner challenged one of the most deeply held assumptions in education, that intelligence is a single, measurable thing. He proposed 8 distinct types of intelligence: verbal linguistic, which is the ability to use language effectively; logical mathematical, which is the ability to think in numbers and patterns; visual spatial, which is the ability to think in images and space; bodily kinesthetic, which is the ability to use the body skillfully; musical, which is sensitivity to rhythm and sound; interpersonal, which is the ability to understand and work with others; intrapersonal, which is self-awareness and understanding of one's own emotions; and naturalistic, which is the ability to recognize and categorize the natural world. The classroom takeaway is powerful. Students are not simply smart or not smart. They are smart in different ways. This is a foundational argument for differentiated instruction and universal design for learning. One important academic note: Gardner's theory is widely applied in education, but has been critiqued by some cognitive scientists who argue the intelligences are better described as talents or aptitudes rather than distinct cognitive systems. It is worth knowing both sides of that conversation. We are almost at the finish line now. Let's cover 2 of the most modern and relevant theories in learning today: growth mindset from Carol Dweck and Connectivism from George Siemens and Stephen Downes. Let's start with growth mindset. Carol Dweck, Stanford University, 2006. Dweck's research found that students hold one of 2 core beliefs about intelligence. A fixed mindset holds that ability is innate and unchangeable. You are either smart or you are not. A growth mindset holds that ability develops through effort, strategy, and persistence. The brain is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Her research showed that students explicitly taught growth mindset principles showed measurable improvement in academic outcomes, particularly in mathematics. And here is the part that always stays with people: the language matters. Saying, "I cannot do this" versus "I cannot do this yet" is not just semantics. That one small word changes behavior, persistence, and ultimately outcomes. Now let's talk about Connectivism. George Siemens and Stephen Downes, 2004 through 2005. Connectivism proposes that in a networked world, knowledge does not just live inside one person's head. It lives across connections between people, devices, databases, and communities. Learning is the ability to navigate, filter, and make those connections. Every prior theory we covered assumed learning happens inside the individual. Connectivism says that in the digital age, that assumption is no longer enough. And this is the theory most directly relevant to artificial intelligence in education today. And now we bring it all together. These theories did not replace each other. They layered. Each one added something the previous theory was missing, and together they give us a complete picture of how learning actually works. Maslow tells us to meet basic needs first. You cannot teach a student who is hungry, unsafe, or disconnected. Piaget tells us to match instruction to developmental readiness. Know where your learner is before you decide where to take them. Vygotsky tells us to hit the zone of proximal development with scaffolding. Find that sweet spot between too easy and too hard. Bruner tells us to use multiple modes of representation and revisit complexity over time. Spiral back, layer it, build on it. Bandura tells us to build self-efficacy through modeling. Believe in your students out loud. It changes what they believe about themselves. Gardner tells us to recognize that students are smart in different ways, designed for the full range of human intelligence. Bloom tells us to aim for higher-order thinking. Do not stop at memorization. Push toward analysis, evaluation, and creation. And Dweck, Siemens, and Downs together remind us to foster a growth mindset and embrace networked knowledge. In a connected world, knowing how to find, filter, and connect information is just as important as what you already know. Every single one of these frameworks shows up in your classroom every day. The question is whether you are using them intentionally. As we near the end of our journey through learning theory, let's zoom out and ask the big question. Why does any of this matter right now? Because the tools are new. The science behind them is not. Every major debate happening in artificial intelligence and education today, guardrails, guided discovery, not just giving the answer, personalization, meeting students where they are, is grounded in one or more of the frameworks we just covered. When a student uses AI as a thought partner, they are operating in a constructivist framework. When they follow a learning network or curate knowledge from multiple digital sources, they are operating in a connectivist framework. When the AI guides them toward the answer, instead of just giving it to them, that is Vygotsky's scaffolding in action. When the tool meets them at their level, that is hitting the ZPD. The researchers we talked about today could not have imagined artificial intelligence, but every principle they discovered still applies. Knowing both the tools and the theory behind them is your advantage as an educator and as a learner. Before we say goodbye, let's take one final look at the big picture. This timeline shows you just how long humans have been working to understand how learning works. It started with Ebbinghaus in the 1880s, studying memory and forgetting. Then Pavlov, Watson, and Thorndike in the early 1900s gave us behaviorism. By the 1940s through the 1960s, Maslow, Rogers, Piaget, and Bloom were exploring the whole person and the thinking mind. The 1960s and 1970s brought us Vygotsky, Bruner, and Bandura, who showed us that learning is social and constructed. In 1983, Gardner expanded our definition of intelligence entirely. And by 2004 to 2006, Siemens, Downs, and Dweck brought us into the digital age with Connectivism and growth mindset. Over a century of brilliant minds, all asking the same question: how do people actually learn? And now, that question is more important than ever, because artificial intelligence is changing education faster than any technology in history. For the first time ever, every student has access to a personalized tutor, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that never gets tired, never judges, and meets them exactly where they are. Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, which one teacher could barely manage for 30 students, can now be scaled to every single learner in the room. But we also have to be honest about the concerns. When AI just gives the answer, it creates cognitive offloading. The brain stops doing the productive struggle that builds real learning. This is especially important for children and young adults whose brains are still developing. The research is clear. Scaffolded AI that guides students toward the answer produces better learning outcomes than AI that simply hands it to them. For neurodiverse learners, students with dyslexia, attention differences, or learning disabilities who were never well served by traditional schooling, AI may be the most powerful equalizer we have ever seen. The frameworks we covered today are not just history. They are the roadmap for using these tools wisely. Thank you so much for joining me for the psychology of learning. Keep asking questions, keep growing, and keep learning.